This is the show dedicated to raising up the next generation of men of faith and character. My name is Mark Stanifer. Welcome to the Next Man Up.
Part of the NRT Podcast Network.
Well, hey guys, welcome back once again to the Next Man Up podcast. So good, as always, to have you along with us for another episode. And you've heard me say this before, to be part of the community that's changing the world by raising up healthy and godly men, one boy at a time. You know this, my name is Mark, and I'm back once again in the saddle to host another episode. Well, as you may have noticed, we are working our way through a bit of a series, if you will, that I'm referring to as Manhood Essentials. In between our guest conversations, which, by the way, we've had some really good ones, at least in my opinion. I may be a little bit biased. Would love to hear from you. Feedback at thenextmanup.com is where you can find us, or head out to one of the different podcast sites and just leave us a review there. That would be fantastic. But in the midst and in between these guest conversations, I'm working my way through a series of qualities that I think are essential to define and to capture and to represent what manhood really is, that ideal that we are after. When we talk about healthy and godly men, what is it that we mean? And so we've talked about courage and responsibility so far, and today we're going to dig into the topic of integrity. Now, if you're like me, when you hear that word, certain thoughts and meanings and definitions and ideas, maybe sermons and teachings and whatnot come to mind. But I want you to stay with me because, like we typically do, I think we're going to offer you a different take on this word, maybe an expanded take on this word, a different way to look at what integrity really means and how we can begin to think about that differently in our own lives and move further down the path of being men of integrity and raising our sons to become men of integrity as well. Well, if you're like me, you have an idea of integrity from things that you've read or conferences perhaps that you've attended. For me, a lot of it came out of the Promise Keeper days back in the 90s. Maybe you were there, maybe you weren't even around in the 90s. I don't know, but there's a lot of different things that can form our understanding of integrity. And I suspect I'm not alone here, but let me speak for me specifically in the old way that I used to think about integrity. When I used to hear that word, here's what would come to mind. Things that I shouldn't do. Don't watch porn. Don't lie. Don't cheat. Especially don't cheat on my wife. Don't swear. Don't. All these different things would come to mind with respect to living with integrity, but it was all biased toward things not to do. I didn't have as many rules as the Old Testament Israelites did in my life, but rule following was my pattern for living. Now, those of you that have listened for a while and heard me talk and share some of my story, you know that I'm inclined to rule following as it is. So this was already the way that I sort of saw myself operating in the world. And as I wanted to be a God follower and to be a man of integrity, I interpreted it probably too simplistically as just simply don't doing these things or not to doing these things and keeping the rules. Exhibiting good behavior is another way that you could say it. Now, maybe for you hear this word or used to hear this word and think, well, that's just an impossibility. It's never going to happen, or it's too constricting, or maybe simply because there was an implication to follow rules when it comes to integrity, You just simply rebelled and broke the rules because there were rules that were being imposed. I don't know how you've thought about integrity up to this point. Neither am I saying that some of these don'ts, these rules to follow, aren't beneficial. That's not at all what I'm saying. In fact, many of them are beneficial. Many of them represent healthy boundaries in terms of how we are to operate in relationship with ourselves and with others in life. But let me suggest to you that maybe the motive or the why behind it matters more than the actual execution of this behavior or these rules. Meaning this, without the proper motive or without the proper understanding of why some of these do's and don'ts are in place, it's just behavior conformity. So that's sort of how I used to think about integrity in the old way. But in the last number of years, I've come to understand integrity in a more expanded way. And let me share with you what I mean by that. Some of this actually parallels my journey of understanding who Jesus is and understanding what he wants from us and how to follow him in a better and a deeper way. Or think of it this way, what are the rules that Jesus asks of us? The way I read it, there are two: love God and love others. And so in that context, loving God and loving others, thinking about what it means to really be a healthy and a godly man, what is a newer or a better way to understand integrity? Well, let me give you three thoughts in the way that I've come to understand it in the recent past. The first thought is this: be moral. And while this is similar to what I was talking about earlier with the do's and don'ts kind of idea, this is probably the main or the principal idea that one thinks of when thinking of integrity, of being moral or having a strong moral principle or foundation by which you live. This is, in fact, part of the literal definition of the word. But what I would challenge you with is this: both the motive and the manner in which we live out Jesus' commands to love God and to love others matter. It's not just the doing, but it is the motive behind it that matters as well. And maybe this as a principle comes to mind for me when in doubt. When you're not sure what to do in the situation or the best move or the best behavior or response or whatever, this mantra I think could serve us well. Just do the right thing. It seems like we have this core understanding of what the right thing is, and it's not so much that we don't know what to do, it's that we just choose not to do it, and we do an easier thing, or we do a less confrontational or less controversial thing. So here's a mantra when it comes to thinking about this first aspect, being moral, is just do the right thing and recognize that the rules that Jesus gives us, the rules for engagement, are pretty few and very wide in scope. Love God and love others. The second thing is this: it's be honest. Now, let me take some time to explain what I mean by that, because you could interpret it this way. Okay, Mark, I get it. Don't lie, right? Like that's the letter of the law here in this idea of being honest. But what does the spirit of the law of being honest mean? I see that as meaning being free of deceit and untruthfulness at all times. Now, once again, that sounds like a high bar. I don't live up to that bar all the time. I'm sure you don't or won't either. But if we apply this thinking as in terms of the spirit of the law, seeking to be free of deceit and untruthfulness, let me also suggest that that applies to not only how we interact with others, but how we interact with ourselves as well. What is it that you think about yourself? What is it that you believe? What assumptions or agreements have you made with who you are and how you operate? How do you talk to yourself? It's not just how we be free of deceit and untruthfulness in interacting with others. It's also how we handle ourselves. This really is a growth opportunity in our thoughts, in our actions, in avoiding certain words, in intentionally choosing other words carefully, all with this eye toward being free of deceit or being free of untruthfulness. Again, be honest. So be moral, be honest. And here's the third piece that really for me has represented the most expansive understanding of integrity that I've experienced in the last few years. Let me start by painting a picture of this. Think of integrity in the context of construction or in engineering, where you want to have integrity of the construction. You want to have integrity of the materials. You want there to be integrity of how things fit together as a whole, as a unit, because we know all too well when there isn't integrity in the construction and the engineering and how things are put together, well, then it's at risk of no longer standing or collapsing. What if we applied this idea of being complete, being connected, being whole for who we are and also how we relate to others? For example, let me get a little bit closer. When you show up as a dad, are you showing up as the same person who is the husband or who is the boss or who is the volunteer? Are you showing up with your whole self? And don't get me wrong, I understand that we have to wear different hats and different situations and roles require different decisions or a different way to engage in the situation, but are you still the same person? Are you the same person at work as you are at home? Are you the same person at home that your coworkers see? When we are not fully engaging with who we are, then we're not being fully integrated in how we live. Or let me say it this way. When we pretend that the work you or the work me is different than the home you or the home me, then we're not being consistent. Again, we're not living in integrity here. We are pushing the definition, pushing the envelope, so to speak, and I realize that this is not an easy thing. It will require vulnerability in your interactions professionally and personally to be that same person, to not be pretending in one situation or maybe hiding in a different situation. This requires strength. We talk about strength. We're going to talk about strength as another quality down the road. This requires strength. It's also a strength builder that we can use to continue to grow. But it takes courage, it takes vulnerability, it takes a willingness to lean further into what it means to be a healthy and godly man. This is an advanced application of what it means to be a man of integrity. Now, let me talk to you dads specifically here for just a minute in how you pass this on to your son. First of all, I would say this. There is age-related application. I get that. The concepts that I'm talking about today don't apply to a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. Even an 8 or a 10-year-old is not fully going to understand what we're talking about. But let me suggest to those of you that have young kids, early on, just establish rules for them, boundaries for them to abide by, and how to treat people and how to respect people and how to interact with others in an appropriate way. Essentially, you're protecting him with these healthy boundaries until he can begin to understand why those boundaries are in place and why they matter. So now, for the later elementary, or the middle school age son that you're parenting, begin to give him a vision for why these boundaries are in place. Why are you doing the things that you're doing on his behalf? Help him to get a bigger picture. Help him to see how this concept in construction and engineering, how materials are put together individually and then assembled together collectively, and how integrity in that construction and that assembly matters, and connect the dots with how we're wired as people, and how it's important for us to be integrated and whole in how we relate to those around us. And also, I would encourage you to begin to encourage him around the spirit of the law, not just the letter of the law. And then finally, for those of you that are parenting later middle school or high school boys, what we call the apprentice, or during the apprentice years, help him to discover who he is and learn to live into that fullness, that completeness in an integrated young man in all his situations, in the classroom, on the playground, on the sports field, in the extracurricular program or club that he's a part of. Help him to understand that being a man of integrity means being consistent and being your whole self in all these different situations. Well, wherever you are in your journey of living with integrity, I invite you to just reflect on what might be missing that I mentioned throughout this episode, or the thoughts that have come to your mind as you're processing this. And then expand into a deeper application. Maybe that's the advanced application that I was talking about. Maybe for you, that's just putting some more healthy boundaries into place. I don't know what it is. But I encourage you to reflect on the next best step for you to take to grow deeper into living as a man of integrity. And I also encourage you to help your son to see the bigger picture, not just rules to follow, but to see the benefits and the vision and the strength-producing advantage that comes from living in this way and becoming a young man and eventually a grown man of integrity. Well, guys, thanks once again for listening in to Mark's musings and this series of essentials of manhood, specifically integrity today. I wish you the best as you become and as you raise up the men of integrity that we are created to be. All the best to you guys between now and next week. We will be back, same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, adios. Hey listeners, thanks for journeying with us on this Next Man Up podcast. We would love to hear from you. Maybe you have a question or an idea, perhaps a topic for us to consider. If that's you and you want to reach out to us, you can get us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. That's feedback@thenextmanup.com. Again, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we'll see you later.